we are going to, how many of you guys have actually logged in to see your scores? Okay, awesome. So most of you are probably familiar already with what you have in front of you and the scores themselves. What I actually am going to do today is I'm going to go over what those scores mean. For those of you guys who didn't take this last year, obviously, it's a completely new PSAT. Okay, so the former PSAT was on a score of 0 to 2400. That's what the SAT was on. The reason that the PSAT and CollegeBoard redesigned this completely is now your PSAT score that you currently have will actually line up to what the SAT is. So the idea is whatever your score that you have is actually what if you took the SAT, it would actually be. Okay? So none of this makes sense, and I don't really have a presentation. We'll get to this in a minute. So so basically your scores fall between 320 and 1520. Okay? So 1520 is not, so the SAT, so PSAT, all that stands for is pre-SAT. The SAT falls on a 320 to 1600. So the difference between 1520 to 1600 is simply because the SAT is harder than the pre-SAT. Okay, so you can't actually score a 1600 on the PSAT. So they can't tell you, yeah, you're going to get a perfect score on the SAT because the SAT actually is a little bit more difficult. So, but what's cool about the new PSAT is that your score that you have is hypothetically what you would score on the SAT if you were to take it today. Now, what you guys need to remember is that most people we don't recommend, and most students do not take the SAT until when? Spring of junior year. Typically when we have students take the SAT and the ACT. Okay, so your scores, everybody in this room, I believe, is in the 90th percentile, if I'm correct, 93rd percentile and above, which is incredibly high achieving. So the 93rd percentile, that's not just for your class, that's not just for the state, that's for the entire nation of everybody that took this test. So that includes juniors also. Okay, so well done. Give yourself a pat on the back. Good. So if you go ahead and open up your booklets, obviously these are the books that you used during the test. So you'll be able to look through these. Yeah, you might have some nightmares come back to you. Some of these. So we're gonna start. Hey, I'm gonna start with you guys on your white sheets. Okay. So this is your score packet. So this is pretty much everything that you could have seen online, but it's going to be in paper version. So what I would ask you to do is, because I'm also going to get this question from all of your parents more than likely, is if you don't take these home and explain to them what we talked about today, they're probably going to be calling me. So save me the 25 different conversations with your parents and go have that conversation. So if you flip it open, right, obviously your total score is going to be right smack dab in the middle up top. Pretty obvious of what that score means. We just talked about it, 320 to 1520. The percentile I will point out is a national percentile. So basically, if you aren't familiar with percentiles, that means that if you're in the 97th percentile, for example, you scored better than 97% of the people that took this test. Okay? It also breaks down, which I think that you guys should be familiar with, is the two scores. So you have evidence-based reading and writing combined, and then your math score. Okay, you will see a few things. They're going to see your percentiles. The way that I use this with sophomores is the most important message is you guys took this for practice. It's really the only reason you took it. Okay, it gives you a good idea and some good insight into where you are. Next year is when it matters. So is everybody familiar with the national merit process? Okay, I'll explain it really quick just so you are aware, and for our viewers. That they are also aware. So the national merit process is junior year, your PSAT scores that you receive will go into basically a formula of all juniors that have taken the score. If you fall into a certain percentile or your score is high enough, you could possibly become a national merit finalist. What does a national merit finalist mean? It means lots of bucks, basically. Lots of people coming after you and saying they want your academic abilities to come to their colleges. Okay, so it's mainly used for scholarship selection purposes. So what does that number actually look like? That's where it gets confusing because this is a brand new test. They've never used it before. So it's really what I'm going to tell you is just based on research that I've done and what people have talked to me about. I can tell you with confidence that in order to be a national merit semifinalist, they take the top 1% of the entire, they take the top 1% of the entire state. Hi, Tyler. They take the top 1% in your state. So it's not nationally. So what you guys have in front of you is the national percentile. It's just the state. So they have no way of actually knowing what that is going to be. It's a kind of a crapshoot. So what we went on in the research that I found is that score, so how this works is they go on a selection index, not your PSAT score. So they convert your PSAT score to a selection index. I don't actually have that formula with me. If you want it, we can look it up. I mean, you trust that you would have that. On your right side of the sheet in the middle at the top is your selection index. So you can see that. Even though you're not a junior, you have your selection index. So for example, this year, what they've hypothetically laid out and tried to convert from former years is that the top 1 percentile in the state of Iowa will be right around 210 as a selection index. Okay, so remember that's for juniors. So if you're around that number, if you were a year from now and received that score, you'd be like, oh, well, I'm sitting pretty good. So what I've been told is that you should be shooting to score 2 to 3 points higher than that to be safe, because you just never know how many people are going to test and what percentile, what scores they're going to receive. So looking forward for next year for you guys, that's something to keep in mind. The top 3 to 4% in each state also get recommended is what they call it. So which is extremely, I mean, that's a resume builder in itself. The schools will look at that to see that you're a commended student as well. Again, this changes every year, so to tell you this is exactly what it's going to be or what that score is going to be, we really don't know. And when I sit down with juniors later this week and go over this, I'm going to make sure to tell them, just because I told you 210, that's not the number it's going to be. That's what they've kind of calculated and the estimated number of where it could possibly be. But we don't really find that out until spring, like late spring. I think it's like April, of who's going to be in the top 3 to 4%. And then you don't find out the top 1% until even further. Make sense? Questions about that? Okay. So my next thing is kind of for you guys to figure out, well, what's next? Now that you have this information, what do you guys do? I would make a pretty good assumption in assuming that you guys are going to all take the PSAT next year, right? I know it was a little time consuming and maybe a little draining, but the benefits far outweigh the risk to take it again for you guys, especially in how well you scored. What you can use this for now, for those of you that did get logged in, anybody check out the AP potential? You did? Okay. So the AP potential, this is going to be awkward when they look at the video and just see me staring at it. The AP potential should come up with something similar to this for those of you that have not seen it. I value the AP potential because students that I've put in AP classes based on this information have done well or enjoyed the class. So what this is going to show you when you pull this up is it may just show all of the classes we have at the high school. This one actually shows everybody's. It's going to say, based on your scores and how you did on specific sections of this test, how they believe that you're going to do in those classes. So when they say not demonstrating potential, that means that at least 40% of the people that they measured this on, which isn't a very high statistic, I understand that, but it's worked out well for me in working with students. 40% are going to score 3 or higher on the test. 3 or higher on an AP test is usually equal to college credit, for those of you that are wondering. So you kind of shoot for that 3 or higher, depending on the school. So has some potential. Those are usually the classes that I'm like, okay, be cautious about. If you have a very good interest, for example, in AP World History, maybe we look at it, but we might want to talk to the teacher first. If it says has potential, they're saying based on how you scored and the things that you know and showed your abilities on in this test, we think you're going to do great. It's going to be a lot of hard work, but we would recommend that you take that class. Okay, so you guys all have access to that and getting on. For those of you that forgot what your login is, maybe didn't actually get it, on the back of your sheet, there's an access code, and that access code will always be able to pull your scores for you. Okay? Okay, so we did total score, we did breakdown, we did national merits. You'll notice this college and career readiness. I'm pretty sure most of you are pretty far into the green. That is basically saying the ability and the knowledge that you have now, you are ready to go to college. Okay, so obviously you're not going to just stop. You're going to keep progressing, hopefully. But what I would use this for next year's test is identify those ones that may not be as high as others. you have your actual test in front of you, and you have the booklet, so you can actually go back and see if maybe I just, maybe I made a dumb mistake, or maybe it was actually something I knew I struggled with that I need to work on. So use that to your ability to be able to improve upon those. That would be the biggest thing for you guys moving into junior year. Identify what some of those weaknesses are. Know that taking some of the classes over the remainder of this year are going to help some of those weaknesses because you're continuing to challenge yourself. But that might play a big role in what classes you take next year. Does anybody plan on taking the SAT next spring? So a year from this spring. Okay. So one of the things that I will tell you is they have free SAT prep. So as some of you may have seen that when you logged in, and it actually personalizes your SAT study plan to how you did on here. So they won't have you waste time studying and prepping for the SAT based on things that they think you scored in the 99th percentile. They're probably going to have you work on more of the challenging things. Some of you may notice, or at least I noticed from an overall picture, reading and writing were well above the math section. I think that's natural for sophomores because you're progressing through a lot of what you saw on this math section now and into next year. So don't be discouraged if your math isn't as high as you thought it was going to be. Okay, so what does all that mean? I'm going to get to this really quick. So you guys have an idea of, I always get the question, well, what does an SAT score look like compared to an ACT? Because everybody's familiar with the ACT in the Midwest. So an SAT score of this year's new test, so 1600. So you guys, your SAT score is whatever that score in the middle of it is. 1,000 is average. 1,200 is far above, and you're in the top 25 percentile of SAT scores. So you guys are only sophomores. So remember that. So what does that mean in terms of the ACT and how it compares? This is kind of a conversion chart that has been put together to be able to see that. So if you take your SAT score and would have an idea of what that might mean if you were to take an ACT, this is kind of how it crosses over. Does that make sense? So this is all, we just went through so many levels of data that you can't always just assume because I got a 1420, I'm for sure getting a 32 on the ACT. Everybody, you guys know some of you may have felt like crap the day you tested, some of you may have felt great. There's a lot of different factors that play into it, but it's relatively close in comparison. Questions? I got all that done in 15 minutes. Yeah. So we'll have an ACT prep course. There'll be two offerings of ACT prep courses. One that is done by Mr. Slater, and they actually do things in the school, and I think it's 4 nights a week before you take the ACT. There's also another one that we're starting this year. Is the very first time we've done it, and it's an outside agency that comes in and does it. We've heard great things about them. Traditionally, what I say is that typically by studying and continuing to do more and more work, you're only going to increase your score by 2 to 3 points. That's just my personal experience. I know nothing to back that up with students. But you guys got to realize you're doing more to prepare for those tests now just by doing what you just did. So the SAT, there's just not a lot of SAT material out there because we don't have a lot of students to take it. The number one thing I would say is because you paid for this test, you have access already to a study plan that nobody else does, and it's personalized to you. So I would make sure you keep this stuff close. AP potential and the study plan on the SAT is probably the 2 most important things you'll get out of it. Okay? And you gotta remember the ACT test itself measures what you have learned in school. So you continue in accelerated courses, that's what they're testing you. Make sense? So there's not a whole lot of studying you can do for these tests. It's about what knowledge you're acquiring when you're in school. Other questions? Is that too much information all at once? I don't think it was that bad. Okay, I wrote down one thing. That's all I got for notes. Just remember, you guys took it for practice. You all did very well. Next year is when we will kind of go through it again. Sound good? Thank you, guys.